From the 8th century BC all the way to the 3rd century, the world was mysteriously in the grips of an intellectual, spiritual, and philosophical renaissance. From the Greco-Roman world to the Levant, Persia, India, and all the way to China, for some mystical reason, the great thinkers of the world would come to the fore and shape public intellectual discourse for millennia. In Greece, this manifested in Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras. In the Levant, this manifested in Moses, Joshua, King David, Solomon, and all the prophets of the Old Testament. In Persia, there was Zoroaster, and in India, there was Buddha. Around the same time in China, there was Confucius, Lao Tzu, Han Fei, Mencius, Zhuangzi, and Li Si. The Axial Age roughly overlaps with the period in Chinese history known as the 100 Schools of Thought era. This is a period that would flower intellectualism in a way that it completely separates it from the antiquated time before that. Much of this time likely had to do with the proliferation of writing and paper whose use had flourished in the Bronze Age. In China, prior to the Zhou era, language was very much codified in arcane runes whose usage was principally found on the back of tortoise shells for the sake of divination. This was the oracle bone script of which the Chinese language had developed out of. In the Zhou era, the written foundation of the Chinese language had taken root with what were known as the bronze inscriptions. There was another factor in play as well. Only 1/3 of the almost 1,000-year-long reign of the Zhou dynasty in China was actually successfully subjugated by this power. The rest of that time, China was dominated by scores of individual feudal states, then eventually 7 warring states. The competition between all these states forced them to become increasingly competitive in the realm of intellectual thought, as each kingdom sought to employ great thinkers, hermit scholars, and philosophers. These upstart kingdoms had no royal blood and only sought supremacy through meritocracy, and thus age-old feudalistic nepotism would give way to the tens of thousands of thinkers who wanted to seize the opportunity to make a name for themselves and find employment as a king's own council. And so all the great thinkers embarked on a quest to find the best way to run a kingdom and the best way someone should align their heart. This period of turbulence that existed during the time of the Eastern Zhou, which includes the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period, is also called the era of the 100 Schools of Thought. I will list out and explain some of the most prominent schools of thought of the time. First is Confucianism. Confucianism was crafted to be the ideal socio-political order, with its philosophy acting as a state religion. Although Confucianism can't be thought of as dealing principally in the realm of metaphysics like a traditional superstitious religion would, Confucians align their intentions with Tian. Tian, which means heaven, also means God, and adherents must align their virtues to be in accordance with Tian's 5 earthly cosmological manifestations. They are the sovereign, who is known as the Son of Heaven, his loyal officials, one's ancestors, one's family, and one's masters. Adherents must then abide by the principles of benevolence, righteousness, justice, wisdom, sincerity, faithfulness, and honesty. Confucianism was a response to what Confucius perceived as a moral decay that had set in during the Spring and Autumn period, a time which marks the decline of the Zhou dynasty. Confucius considered himself a transmitter of cultural values inherited from the Xia, Shang, and Zhou eras. In those times, the dynasties were beholden to an unspecified state religion that revolved around the cult of the emperor and his divine authority over man, and the all-powerful Tian, which held sway over all things in the space between heaven and earth, representing the physical realm that man lived in. As the Zhou fell into decay, Confucius sought to codify the rules that would allow the masses to be transported back to a perceived golden age of human morality and ethics. Confucianism is considered the longest-lasting historical legacy of Chinese civilization, whose impact is embedded into the archetypal framework of the individual and the wider collective consciousness even in the modern day. The second most important school of thought of this era is legalism. Legalism is considered fundamentally opposed to Confucianism. The worldly concern of Confucianism rests upon the belief that human beings are good, teachable, improvable, and perfectible through personal and communal endeavor. Legalism, on the other hand, posits that humans at their core are evil, selfish, and their behavior can only be redirected through the efforts of a powerful sovereign. Legalism has its roots in Confucianism, where the third most influential figure in Confucianism, Shunzi, differed with Confucius about the nature of humans, hypothesizing that human nature is originally evil. However, through cultivation, a person can be brought into virtuous form through education and the practice of morality. Han Fei and Lisa, Shunzi's most prominent students, would take this foundational difference in understanding about human nature a step further, coming to the belief that humans are only governed by self-interest and their capacity to change was limited. This would lead to them becoming ideological converts to the philosophy of legalism. They were influenced by the teachings of warring states statesman and intellectual Yinyang, who rose to fame for taking the backwater state of Qin into the preeminent superpower of the age by implementing his legalist policies. These policies could best be defined as Machiavellian statecraft, where all power was centralized with the emperor and his henchmen, with the sole purpose of cleverly micro and macro managing the lives of all the citizens to benefit the state. These totalitarian measures included creating a surveillance state, implementing a brutal form of execution for even the most minor infractions, but also instituting agrarian reform measures, as well as systems to make mass conscription from the peasantry into a trained war machine seamless. This made the state of Qin rich economically and ready for large-scale war at a moment's notice, ultimately paving the way for its eventual domination of China. Han Fei would take these teachings a step further, writing a manual for the King of Wei called the Han Feizi, which outlined the way the sovereign should be with his subordinates. The ruler should be an impenetrable being at all times, with his motivations being completely unclear to subordinates. Han Fei explained that being the sovereign of a nation invites one's subordinates to act duplicitously for favor with the king to increase their station in life. The bureaucrats, often beautifying the results of their actions to impress the sovereign, frequently lead to disaster in a country, and thus the Han Feizi outlines the way in which the sovereign can convey what he wants indirectly to keep his subordinates guessing about what his true intentions are. Although the ruler of the state is considered the most powerful in the land, in some sense he's also a slave to the tens of thousands of underlings beneath him who are all selfishly motivated, with their own intrinsic desires at the forefront. Han Fei and his contemporary Li Si would formulate Machiavellian strategies that the leader could follow to keep his tens of thousands of retainers aligned purely with the interest of the state. The third most prominent school of thought in the age is called MoISM. Considered a rival school of thought to Confucianism, MoISM shared the philosophy with the Confucians that humans were inherently good-natured, but took it many steps further, aligning with the beliefs of French Renaissance philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. MoISM asserted that humans were born good, are good, and even if they stray from moral virtues, aren't inherently evil. The MoISM were regimented like a religion, so that groups of MoISM could live together and enforce their beliefs on a group level. The MoISM philosophical outlook on life simply acted as a base layer from which the practitioners used to build a culture of intellectualism that principally focused on logic. For the MoISms, the nature of a human being was in fact a conclusion deduced solely by logic, and because of this, the MoISms derived their spiritual beliefs from intellectualism and formed somewhat of a cult around mathematics, in the same way the Pythagoreans in Greece formed a cult around numbers and formulas. This peculiar blend of spiritualism and intellectualism made the MoISms into a powerhouse of mathematics and engineering in the ancient world. Due to their belief that humans are inherently good, war was anathema to their belief system, and as such, they were vehement pacifists. Despite being hippies during China's longest-running period of conflict, they were in fact extremely politically relevant and came to hold sway over the spring and autumn state of Song, where it was practically a state religion. The way in which the state of Song survived was by way of the MoISms applying their advanced mathematical and engineering skills to craft weapons of war purely for defensive purposes. As such, they invented and constructed a raft of siege defensive weapons and were experts in fortification building. MoISms were employed heavily in the spring and autumn period to build the defensive structures in all the states. This would be a way that the Moors would export their beliefs about pacifism by providing access to even the smallest kingdoms with state-of-the-art defensive capabilities, for in their mind, if every kingdom was impregnable, then there would be no need for warfare. Of all the preeminent schools of thought, Taoism is as nebulous as they come, as there is very little concrete definition for what it is, as it is in fact a conglomeration of a vast multitude of philosophical beliefs, religious rites, customs and traditions, which have been cobbled together over thousands of years dating back into Chinese antiquity. Taoism can be separated into two distinct forms, Taoist philosophy and Taoist religion. What we ascribe Taoism to in the West pertains principally to the philosophical dogma outlined in the book called the Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu. This is the purest form of what Taoism is, and it explains an esoteric ideology of the nature of being intricately tied to what could be described as a universal, unchangeable way by which all things abide by. It emphasizes the interconnectedness of all existence and underscores the notion that individuals can align themselves with the Tao to attain harmony and balance in their lives. The Tao represents a cosmic force that guides and influences the unfolding of events, promoting a sense of unity with a larger cosmic order. Part of this philosophical endeavor requires the practitioner to forego their understanding about the binary dichotomy that exists within nature. For instance, hot, cold, happy, sad, win, lose. All of these things are made to be thought of as practically one thing, and as such they aim to achieve a state of tranquility, where the practitioner is made to be immune to the volatile forces of the world. Religious Taoism, on the other hand, pertains to a collection of codified superstitions and traditions that originate in China's prehistorical era, in an age defined by shamanism. This covers everything from alchemy, astronomy, astrology, divination, fortune-telling, spiritual healing, and sacrifices. Religious Taoism was principally the way the Chinese people interfaced with metaphysical aspects of nature, such as gods, spirits, and their ancestors. One of the very prominent schools of thought during this period was known as Syncretism, which simply meant a combination of some of the prominent schools of thought. Because there are so many, and many of these make up the 100 schools of thought, I won't mention all of them, but of the most important of these syncretic schools of thought is called Huanglao. Huanglao is a combination of the supposed esoteric teachings of the Yellow Emperor, known as Huangdi, and the supposed esoteric teachings of Lao Tzu, the founder of philosophical Taoism, whilst at the same time incorporating aspects of legalism. Arguably becoming the most popular school of thought during the Han Dynasty, the Huanglao ideology became particularly popular for superstitious rulers who sought a leadership style that was in alignment with the Tao. It advocated for leadership based on the principles of non-interference and minimal governance, as outlined by the Taoist principle of Wu-wei, which can be translated as non-action. This is something that legalist scholar Han Fei strongly advocated for and outlined a number of Machiavellian stratagems that the ruler can implement to make himself more scarce, for the less he does, the less that can go wrong and the more smoothly the bureaucracy can operate. With Huanglao also perpetuating strongly the belief of the religious divinity of the emperor. The role of the emperor throughout the ages would increasingly be that of a divine, untouchable figure with impenetrable motives, acting from behind the scenes and completely removed from even his closest subordinates, ultimately characterizing the emperor as a shut-in, as exhibited in the lifestyles that would lead in places like the Forbidden City built in the 15th century. Enshrouded in war for hundreds of years, the school of diplomacy coalesced into a crystallized understanding of the perfect way to enact diplomatic strategies and engage in successful political maneuvering. If the goal of the art of war was to win a war without fighting a battle, then diplomacy was the front line of hostility between states, and therefore only the best diplomats were given the task of playing on the geopolitical chessboard. These would have been graduates of the school of diplomacy who would have been masters at understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each of the warring kingdoms and how best they could wield the labor, efforts, and resources of the other states to their own advantage. The culmination of this school of thought came to be split into two camps that were specific to the time of the warring states. One camp was known as the School of Horizontal Diplomacy that promoted that the best outcome for diplomacy would be to seek alliances with the stronger powers in order to ride their coattails to success and supremacy over China. The two dominant powers of the Warring States period were Qi and Qin, which lay on the horizontal axis of China, hence giving it the name horizontal diplomacy. The second in this dichotomy was the School of Vertical Diplomacy, which advocated for the opposite, for the weaker states on the vertical axis to align with each other against the stronger powers of either Qi or Qin. This debate within the School of Diplomacy would last hundreds of years until it eventually became clear that no united front would be able to stop the ascendant powers of Qin, who would eventually go on to dominate China in 229 BC. The School of Agriculturalism emerged as an egalitarian ideology that stood in opposition fundamentally to the hierarchical nature that had been steeped into Chinese society since the cult of the first emperor of China, Huangdi, had taken place a millennia ago. At the time of China's mythological origins, where Emperor Huangdi claimed divine sovereignty over the realm, there stood another legendary ancient rival who went by the name of the Flame Emperor, but was more traditionally known as the Divine Farmer. The Divine Farmer, known as Shennong, was said to have taught the ancient Chinese the practices of agriculture and animal husbandry. During the 100 Schools of Thought period, Shennong became a venerated figure who, unlike Huangdi, was portrayed in Chinese folk tradition as working the fields alongside everyone else and consulting with everyone when a decision had to be reached. And so, in opposition to the hierarchical collectivism that was prominent, the agriculturalists stood in opposition and proclaimed that the example of the correct way to live was set by their legendary forebear was that of a peasant-based egalitarian communalism, whereby the benevolent ruler should be out tilling the field along with the peasants, just like the mythological Shennong would have done. The School of Yinyang posited a theory to elucidate an understanding of the universe by envisioning the elements that made up the natural forces in it, which included the complementary forces of yin, dark, cold, female, negative, and yang, light, hot, male, positive, and the 5 elements, water, fire, wood, metal, and earth. In its early days, the school of Yinyang was closely associated with the states of Yen and Qi. Over time, its epistemological theories gained significance in Taoism's alchemical and magical dimensions, as well as becoming the framework for Chinese medicine. Zhou Yan, a prominent Chinese philosopher and representative thinker of the school of Yinyang, was described by British biochemist and sinologist Joseph Needham as the real founder of all Chinese scientific thought. Zhou Yan's teachings synthesized and systematized the prevalent theories of yin-yang and the 5 elements. The School of Medical Skills is a proliferation of works that has culminated into what we know now as traditional Chinese medicine. Most of these works are based on the study of the revered book known as the Huangdi Neijing, also known as the Canon of the Yellow Emperor. Being the most crucial text in traditional Chinese medicine, it's described as being the work of the legendary Yellow Emperor, although it was compiled during the Warring States period. Grounded in Taoist principles, the Huangdi Neijing explores the balance of yin and yang, the flow of qi, and the influence of the 5 elements. The first part of the book discusses fundamental health principles such as the importance of balancing yin-yang and teaching of the 5 elements that make up the body, while the second half focuses on acupuncture, needling techniques, moxibustion, and practical applications of medical theories including diagnoses and treatment of diseases. The book introduces diagnostic methods like observation of the heartbeat, as well as a number of other questions which are vital for traditional Chinese medicine practitioners in assessing overall health and imbalances. It also provides insights into herbal medicine and lifestyle modifications as a means of restoring the balance of yin-yang and promoting the flow of qi. The promulgation of traditional Chinese medicine departs from the old shamanistic belief that diseases were caused by demonic influences, which was the standard way in which diseases were diagnosed and cured. Yangism, not to be confused with Yang of Yin-Yang, was founded by Yang Zhu and was a philosophical school of thought that stood in opposition to Confucianism in that it espoused the belief that human actions should be driven purely through self-interest. what could be described by modern psychological parlance as ethical egoism, Yangism focused on the concept of Xing, which means human nature. This is a concept that would later be absorbed in Confucianism by Mencius, but until that time, Yangism was one of the sole advocates for individualism amongst the sea of collectivist ideologies. Much of our learnings from Yangism comes from its greatest rival Mencius, who wrote of Yangzhu as, quote, "If by plucking one hair he might benefit the whole world, he would not do it." Yangis emphasized maintaining self-interest, safeguarding one's uniqueness, and avoided entanglements with abstract notions of morality. Yangis upheld the two characters, Weiwo, for me, as he saw pursuing one's own interests vital for self-cultivation. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you'd like to support the continued creation of this educational content about Chinese culture, anthropology, and history, please consider subscribing to my Patreon for as little as $5 a month. It does a lot to keep this channel going and to help with its upkeep. And if you're not already subscribed, please click the subscribe button and click the little bell, as YouTube no longer shows when a new video comes up on your YouTube feed, even if you're a subscriber. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.